So the way it was done, the way it began was with the carbon print. I'm leaving out this oddity here that I'll talk about in a minute. And it began with a carbon print because, as I said earlier, we could make carbon prints with any pigment that we wanted. So we could have a cyan layer, a magenta layer, a yellow layer. And you could make 3 color separations, and you could laboriously transfer one layer onto a piece of paper and then transfer the next in perfect register and the next in perfect register after that and get a full color picture. And that's what this is. This is a 3-color carbon print. And if we scratched it carefully with a razor blade, we could scratch through one layer and get to the next and see the next below that. There was a variation called the Carbro print that didn't require big color separations, but used big black and white bromide prints as the separations. That's what this one is, and if you look later on, you can see the bands of the cyan and magenta and yellow at the outside because this print has never been trimmed. And it shows you where those color layers exist. So color photography was extremely clunky and clumsy and hard to do when it was based on this system of color separations. And that didn't change until the Eastman Kodak company hired a couple of musicians, I think in the late 30s, maybe early 30s. They were a couple of musicians who were interested in chemistry, and Kodak funded them, put them up in a hotel in New York City, and paid all their fees and paid for them to buy materials. And they figured out how to put these 3 color separations onto one piece of material. And the thing they invented was Kodachrome. This astonishing material which we could go to the store and buy and have the 3 separation layers and the 3 filters all built into one support. It was an absolute miracle, absolute miracle. And it's what created the modern color photography of today, which we have on the side. The earliest color photographic process was completely different, and it was an eccentric thing that I've left out and wanted to talk about separately, and it's called the Lumière Autochrome. Well, this is an enlargement of an autochrome. This is a fake that we've put in here because if we put the original under here, it'd be ruined by the light being turned on for 6 months. But I have to describe how the autochrome was made because it's so crazy. These are the French brothers who invented movies. And they figured out that if they got a glass plate and they coated the glass plate with dyed potato starch grains, little tiny grains, and they dyed a 1/3 red and a 1/3 green and a 1/3 blue and coated them on the plate and then put a black filler in between them, all very, very fine. They figured out they could photograph, make a picture through that plate onto a glass plate, and they could develop the glass plate and redevelop it as a positive and bind it back in contact, and if we look through it this way, we'd see a color picture. It's an absolutely miraculous process. And it worked very, very beautifully, and it happened, I think, around 1905 to 1910. And if you look at this, you can see a blow-up of the Lumière Autochrome on the top, and you can see the grains and the black filler in between. And they've badly faded. The blue is still pretty good, but the red is turned sort of orange. It should be a beautiful bright red. It was in the original. And this is the corner of her hat here. So color photography had the autochrome, which was a dead end, sort of died on its feet pretty soon. It had the color carbon print. It had the Carbro print, which was used for making advertisements, really quite poor advertisements for the trade. And then it had this beautiful, beautiful process called the dye transfer print. And the dye transfer was the end of color photography that you had, for which you had to make separations. And this is a beautiful, beautiful dye, this picture of the vase with the berries by a man named Fassbender, who was a terrific technician. And I think we have a Helen Levitt dye in the corner, and I think we have a William Eggleston dye underneath it, although neither one of them made them. Somebody else made them for them, of course, because they were so complicated. But the dye transfer print involved making 3 separation negatives and exposing them to a funny material called a wash-off relief film, which was a little like carbon where it remained thick where it was heavily exposed. And it was soaked in dye, and it was soaked in a dye that was the complementary color of the filter used to make the plate. And they were rolled with register pins into contact to a receiver sheet, and the dye moved over and built up the color picture. And the dye transfer had a reputation of being the greatest printing process, but there are many, many really terrible dye transfer prints out there. And when they're bad, they're really bad, you know. So we should take a break. We should take a little break because I'm losing my voice badly.